All right, it's 7:04. Welcome, everyone. I'm Wally Bobkowitz, the City Administrator. Thank you for joining us this evening as we talk about the proposed capital improvement plan for the next 6 years. Mayor Pauley presented it last evening to the City Council for their initial overview. As I'll go through the slide deck that we used last night, there's multiple opportunities for citizen involvement. We also had with us last night members of our Environment Board, Parks Board, Planning Policy Committee, and Parks, Planning Policy, Environment, and I'm missing one, Autumn. You're going to have to be my straight person tonight. Which one am I missing?
Which ones did you say? Sorry, I was just monitoring it, entering, letting people in.
Planning Policy,
Parks,
Environment, and
Transportation.
Advisory Board. Okay, so those were the 4 boards, and so the mayor has also asked those 4 boards for feedback, and they'll be providing that through the course of the month. So unless there's any initial questions, let me share my screen and pull up the PowerPoint. All right, can everybody see that? It should say 2022-2027 Capital Improvement Plan.
We got it. We got it.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. Appreciate your help this evening. So the purpose tonight is to provide an overview of the proposed 2022-2027 Capital Improvement Program plan. It is the first of several meetings with the Council looking at ultimate adoption at the end of May. We'll talk a little bit about the schedule. We'll talk a little bit about what a capital improvement plan is, the process of project selection and prioritization, a revenue overview and funding strategy, because certainly while it's great to have projects, you also need to pay for them. We will also give a very broad overview of the asset categories and some of the major projects included in them. Then we'll talk a little bit about what the Council's next steps will be, and then happy to answer any questions that you have. The document was released yesterday. It can be found at issaquah.gov/CIP. I'm going to do my best to answer as many questions as I can. I think the purpose tonight is not to drill down into minute detail into a lot of the projects, but really just to provide a general overview and to provide some insight into the directions that we're trying to head with our capital improvement program. If there are specific questions tonight, I think we know everyone on the meeting, so we can provide email responses. Autumn, you and I can keep track of the questions that need answers, and we'll provide those responses. We'll also make that available to the City Council. But if you have specific questions or comments and would like to share them with the Council, you can always send an email to citycouncil@issaquah.gov. If you have questions for the staff, communications@issaquah.gov. I would ask that you hold your questions to the end. Those of you who are familiar with how we've been doing these community meetings online, if you can just put the word question or comment in the chat box, we'll just go through them at the end, as many as you have. And so unless, again, there are any overview questions, we'll just get right into it. So the anticipated schedule, last night, Mayor Pauley transmitted the CIP, and we provided an overview presentation, which is basically the presentation you're about to see. We have the community meeting tonight. Council deliberations will begin next week on April 27th. They will continue with the public hearing on May 3rd, and additional deliberations are expected then. Final deliberations expected on May the 11th. And then the final public hearing on May 17th, and it's anticipated that the plan will be adopted at the meeting on May 17th. So what is a capital improvement plan? First and foremost, the CIP is a planning document, not a budget document. And why is that important? Well, some folks see a CIP and think that that is a rock solid commitment on behalf of the city that we are going to do those projects exactly as they're listed in the CIP. And certainly that is always the plan, but we do need a budget associated with that. And so annually the City Council adopts a budget. And so while we're working on the CIP in the spring, the capital improvement program for the next year in 22 will be presented, a funding document will be presented with the operating budget in the fall. What we do include in this document are estimated budget amounts. We also include estimated revenue sources. And as we'll talk in the presentation, we feel pretty confident that the first couple of years of the proposed plan, we have revenue sources identified. The out years, those 3, 4, 5, 6-year pieces of the plan, the funding mechanisms, the timing, other factors get a little bit squishier. So as we talk about this as a planning document, this is what we're proposing, what Mayor Pauley is proposing as a plan for the 6 years, but it is not a budget that comes each year through the operating budget. So what a CIP does, and covered portions of this, it's updated every other year, so it's been 2 years since the council's looked at the 6-year plan. We look at the city's comprehensive plan as a guide in developing this plan. It informs the annual transportation improvement program. It allows projects to utilize certain restricted revenue sources, which we'll talk about a little bit moving forward. And then, of course, subject to change. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, what the CIP is not is a budget commitment. This is the direction we want to go in. We are estimating costs best that we can, but again, this is not a budget commitment. So when you think about what is the CIP, how it fits into other pieces of what we do, this graphic, I think, begins to tell that tale. The city's comprehensive plan is sort of the Bible of what we would like to be and what we would like to do as a city. The capital improvement plan is a subset of those goals and objectives, and then the transportation improvement program is a subset of the capital improvement plan. There are lots of other inputs that go into these various planning documents, and these arrows kind of indicate some of those: the park strategic plan, community engagement, specific studies or initiatives, the Old Town traffic calming study being one of those, other project specific studies and analysis. On the capital side, as far as utilities are concerned, we look at the utility rates periodically, and then there are also special standalone plans like the recently adopted mobility master plan. So the plans inform the CIP. This slide talks a little bit about that. I think I've covered most of those elements already. When you look at a project included in the CIP document, as you review the document that was released yesterday, you'll find on its pages a summary and a justification for each project, the estimated cost for each year of the 6-year CIP, estimated revenue sources, estimated ongoing and operational costs for each project. So what we tried to do in Issaquah, and actually better than many communities, I think, is try to identify what are those operational costs that the implementation of a capital project and the budget associated with that does not end with the project completion, but there are ongoing operational costs required for each project. And then again, for Issaquah specifically, we look at the city strategic plan, which was adopted in 2019, and how the goals of the strategic plan are served by the CIP. So when we look at a general framework for the CIP, we assume no new revenue sources. The community has talked about ongoing new revenue sources over time. Those are not currently on the table. And so we are focused, especially in the front end of the CIP, with what can be done with existing resources, and certainly the document highlights the need, unfunded needs in later years. We are also looking at revenues generated by programs annually, and we're also looking at fund balance. And included in this project, in this proposed plan, we would be looking as far as a budget for 22 and beyond to use some fund balance, to use one-time dollars to move forward with projects. And then each of the proposed program projects has a notation for selection criteria that were used for each project. And we talked a little bit about that last night with the City Council about selection criteria. Involving the boards and commissions this year is an important step. It's not been done extensively as it's being done this year, but certainly we can continue to do better with the backing up the timing for the process to go through with the community and the boards and commissions that selection criteria earlier in the process. I think one of our challenges that we're looking at, and we'll I think, continue to look at over the next couple of years is how we can back this process up even further. 2 years ago, this process began later in the spring and ran into the early summer. We are hoping, again, to be done by the end of May. If we back this up, then the question is, when would that selection criteria discussion happen with the boards and commissions in the community? Probably would need to begin in January or February if we were to keep the timing as we have now in the April-May timeframe. Our challenge there is the CIP is a 12-month process, and once the council adopts a budget at the end of the year, we need to have resources to actually begin working on those projects. So that's something we're going to continue to look at. But just mention that to highlight that this is a process that's going to continue to evolve. And I think that if we can make it a 12-month process and identify appropriate staffing resources to do that, we will. The selection criteria matrix that we looked at, the staff, the community priority, replacement or repair of existing infrastructure, identified funding source, environmental impact, conformity to strategic plan goals, and addressing life and safety concerns. Again, I think as we discussed this last night with the council and the boards and commissions that were present, the issue of equity and an equity lens and fairness to various parts of the community also came up, and that was not a overt part of the process used to put together the document before you this evening, but certainly Mayor Pauley and the council are committed to continue to look at that as we look at equity issues, not only with the operating budget and programmatically with what we do, but that will find its way as well into the capital program. So the CIP, looking at it as we're moving forward, and I've mentioned this already, really focuses on the 22 and 23 balancing revenues and expenditures. And we know with the document that we presented that our needs on the expenditure side for 24 and beyond exceed revenues. So one of the things that we will need to do in the out years is continue to identify appropriate revenues to meet the needs to fund those proposed expenditures. Project selection and prioritization. Again, as you look at that matrices, as we applied it this year, the first category, maintaining existing infrastructure, and some of the key projects there are pavement management program, concrete maintenance program, and trail repair program. This year in 21, we were able to roll over dollars that were suspended with the pandemic for the program in 20, and so we were able to fund what would have been spent in 20 and 21, as well as a regular interval for spending in 21. So this is one of those projects where we just don't have enough annual revenue to support a very aggressive pavement management program, even with doubling up in 21. So we're going to continue to focus on ways to do that. The concrete maintenance program, that is curbs, gutters, sidewalks mostly, and what are we doing to make sure that those are in good repair. So there was dollars placed in the budget for 21, and we're looking to do that again in 22 and beyond. Trail repair program, again the same kind of concept. Lots of trails that are very well used by the community. We are not investing in those trails as we need to, and I think as we look forward in the future years, it's going to be a matter of identifying additional revenue sources. The community priorities, again, reflecting the priorities in the Mobility Master Plan, the Park Strategic Plan, and again, some of these are pushed to out years. The I-90 crossing between 10th and 12th Avenue Northwest, sometimes referred to as the underover crossing, that has money budgeted for additional planning for 22 and 23. That revenue source is currently tied to a budget allocation in the Washington State Legislature's budget. We don't know at this point if that money will be funded or not, but the mayor has indicated this is a priority, and if we discover that the legislature does not fund it, I imagine we will come back with a identified funding source for that work. Newport Railway State Route 900 to Southeast 54 street improvements. The city has already received some federal dollars for that. It's a very expensive project, and one of the things that was looked at as the city was contemplating a transportation impact tax a few years back was significant funding for this project. as we look to new transit funding options in the future. Certainly this project will be a key among them. We are putting money in for 22 to continue moving forward with this project, and I think as we continue to talk about funding strategies, this will be a key project to be looked at. The Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements, another long-standing expensive project that we do not have funding for to complete over several years. The mayor is committed to continuing to invest in this project in 22 and continuing to look for additional revenue sources moving forward there. A couple of other projects here, which again have been identified as community priorities as we move forward. Again, a roadmap for future discussions. The mayor, in her presentation last night, I think made clear that 21 is not the year that she is proposing to have those future revenue discussions, at least in not in a way that would get us to having those revenue sources in place by the beginning of 22. But I think she's hoping that this discussion, the dialogue with the community, the dialogue with the council, will help inform those future revenue discussions starting either at the end of this year or the beginning of next. As I mentioned, the strategic plan is an important indicator, an important driver for the capital improvement program. And so what we've done here is break down by project costs and by project count the projects as they fit into the various strategic plan goals. Not surprisingly, by project cost, 52% are infrastructure and 46% by project count are infrastructure. The lion's share is that. A good chunk for mobility and environmental stewardship and the other strategic plan goals. So again, as we talk about project programmatically, we also need to look at revenue and funding strategies, and we'll talk a little bit here about those funding strategies. Over the course of the entire plan, we're looking at proposed total revenues to fund that of $124 million, broken up in a variety of different ways. The real estate excise tax is a big chunk at $29 million, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of these in a minute. The mitigation impact fees that we receive from redevelopment, utility revenues, again, our water, sewer improvements are largely funded through utility revenues. Some grants, state and federal grants, mostly on the highway area, and then a bucket of other funds, including money from fund balance. And we're also anticipating that we would take some of the city's $8.6 million that we're receiving from the American Recovery Act to invest in capital projects over the next couple of years. So that's also included as part of that $10 million. Saying this several times, but I'll say it again, that there are competing priorities for the revenue. The revenues that I covered, many of them are general revenues. And so municipal facilities, technology, parks, transportation initiatives all compete for the same general revenues. And so as the council and the community make decisions in prioritization, we have to look at the general fund, mitigation fees, school safety zone funds. Those are all general revenues. Really anything that's not a water sewer project largely falls into this category. And with expenditures and project costs exceeding available revenues, that's a challenge currently and will be a challenge moving into the future. So we talk a little bit more specifically about the revenue sources. The real estate excise tax, which is a tax on all sales of real estate, is collected in two different buckets, REIT 1 and REIT 2. We can talk more specifics about that if you'd like later, but REIT 1 under state law may be used for any capital purpose identified in the CIP, and REIT 2 is used primarily for transportation improvements. So while there's flexibility on REIT 1, less flexibility in REIT 2. We also receive mitigation and impact fees through new development, and those are in these various buckets. And we have revenues from these that are used to support capital projects as we move forward. School Safety Zone Fund, the school safety traffic cameras that we have raise revenue, and we are able to allocate projects and prefer to allocate projects funded by the school safety zone to transportation, mobility, and traffic safety related capital improvements. And listed here on the slide are several that are being proposed that would be funded through the School Safety Fund. The general fund, part of the proposal that the mayor presented would be to take a portion of general fund balance to fund projects, and looking at these projects listed here: the Gilman Boulevard improvements, Newport Way, Northwest of Amish Road, pavement management and concrete maintenance, as some of those projects that would be recommended to be funded on a one-time basis through general fund balance. Utility revenues, again, looking at rate structures. We have a rate structure that's been council approved through 25, and then as we look at future rate structures, that would be for 26 and beyond. There is some flexibility that the council may choose to exercise with the money that we're receiving from the American Recovery Act, the act that was passed by the Congress on March 11th, signed by President Biden on March 11th. Has specific language calling out water, sewer, and telecommunications projects, so the council may choose to allocate additional funds from that to these utility projects, but they are largely funded through rates. Then asset category overview. We've talked about revenues. Then this next section talks about the broad categories in which we budget capital programs. Capital equipment, rolling stock, municipal facilities, city hall, our parks facilities, parks and trails, self-explanatory, technology and systems. We're very fortunate in Issaquah to have a pretty robust set of enterprise technology. Certainly, we would not have been able to have been closed in our offices now for 13 odd months without the support of a lot of the technology systems that we have in place. So there's continuing dollars to support that, transportation infrastructure, and then of course water, sewer, and stormwater utilities. This does a breakdown by asset category. As you can see, the lion's share of this is on the transportation side, water, stormwater, sewer, not far behind, parks and trails, and municipal facilities. Again, a lot of money over the course of the 6 years, broken up in a variety of ways. Just talk a little bit briefly about some of the major pieces of the asset categories. Capital equipment, again, the utility truck purchases, trailer-mounted vacuum excavators. Again, nothing really sexy, but really these large pieces of rolling stock that are needed to maintain our infrastructure, and the main funding sources of this are real estate excise tax, and then for those pieces of equipment that support our utility operations, we're able to use utility revenues. Municipal facilities, 2 years ago with the capital program, there was a lot of discussion about replacement of City Hall, moving city staff operations around. You'll see less of that in this current capital plan, largely because of the pandemic, and largely because the city really, since we are still not reopened to the public here in April of 2021, and don't plan to be reopened to the public until for office hours, office availability until the summer, we have really put aside any major capital projects for the replacement of any of our facilities. We are looking to reopen and not have City Hall Northwest open. So we're trying to look to see if we can consolidate those public-facing services to the second floor of City Hall. So as you look at these projects, we're investing in existing facilities by and large. And the main funding sources, again, for here, real estate excise tax, mitigation and impact fees, and for those facilities that support our utility operation, utility revenues. Parks and trails, bread and butter of the capital program. Notable projects here are listed. Real estate excise tax, mitigation and impact fees, and grants, and King County Parks Levy are an important part of this. There's a lot of additional work. There's a lot of additional need on the Parks and Trails side, and certainly when we look at revenue issues, being able to fund parks and trail infrastructure over time is a big revenue issue for us. Technology and systems, talked briefly about this, looking at records management and maintenance management. Munis is our online financial system. and then cybersecurity hardening. Many communities, all communities are looking at cybersecurity as issues, so those are notable projects in the next 6-year plan. And again, main funding sources here: real estate excise tax, IT cost allocation. Various operations within the city are assessed specific costs associated with their use of our information technology, so there's revenue associated with that, as is from the utilities. So any technology that we use that support our utility operations are included there. Transportation, another big chunk. The I-90 crossing, probably first among that, as a project that is looking for dollars, locally generated dollars, to keep that project moving, to support the arrival of light rail in Issaquah. 12th Avenue Northwest, State Route 900, a continuing project, the Newport Way, State Route 900 to Southeast 54th, I've mentioned. The Northwest Sammamish Road, now motorized improvement, I've mentioned, and pavement management program, and the Southeast Black Nugget retaining wall repairs. So those are some of the notable projects. And again, the funding sources here: the excise tax, mitigation impact fees, school safety zone, general fund balance, and grants. Water utility, the city over the last 2 years has spent quite a bit of time planning out next steps for investment in our water utility infrastructure. So we are looking at that. Again, 2 years ago, one of the big projects was a treatment plant. That treatment plant has gone out further into the future, as the city has decided to get Cascade Water Alliance water from the city of Seattle. So that will help us from having to make large investments, certainly in the front end of the 6-year period, on any kind of additional main water treatment facilities. But these are the notable projects there, and again, funded by utility revenues. Sewer projects also important and funded by utility revenues. Stormwater utility, again, several projects here: Lower Issaquah Creek Stream riparian enhancements, Squaw Valley Park South Creek restoration, storm and surface water master plan implementation, Old Town stormwater improvements, and Pickering ditch flood control. So again, there's some grant opportunities in this area, but much of this is coming from utility revenues. So that is a very brief overview of revenue issues, expenditure issues. Again, the purpose of the presentation tonight is not to get into finite details on a lot of these projects, but really just to give a general overview of what's in the plan, the proportions, and some of the key policy questions. So as we look at next steps, again, we have the community meeting tonight. The council will begin its deliberations next week on April 27th. We're going to start with the non-utility projects and walk the council through, receive any public comment, answer questions on the non-utility projects. Continue on May 3rd with a focus on utility projects, plus anything else that the council wishes to discuss. We'll continue those deliberations on May 11th, and then the final public hearing will be and CIP adoption on the 17th. So certainly opportunities for members of the community to provide input in addition to tonight would be during public comment. On the 27th would be during public comment, as well as the public hearing on May 3rd, during public comment on May 11th, and then public comment and the public hearing on May 17th. So that is the overview. I'm going to take down the presentation and take a couple of sips of water, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Autumn, I think we're scheduled to go 2 hours this evening, or an hour and a half?
Yes, up till 2 hours.
2
And
hours.
for those that are joining us too, you can, there's right at the lower right part of your screen, there's a chat button, and if you click on that, you can send a chat to, there's different options, but it'd be great if you could send it to all attendees so everyone can see your chat. You can also raise your hand, and if you click on participants and see the list next to your name, you can also raise a little hand if you have a question.
Questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you for your time. It's still sunny out.
Are you kidding me?
My son was playing in the cul-de-sac when I left, and he's probably still there. So.
So I'm trying to figure. Go ahead, Hart.
Sorry. So on the transportation improvements for Newport Way, on page 104 of the document, there's a chart, and the chart shows the costs from 2022 through 2027. And I'm looking at one specific line called construction, and the construction costs, there's funding for 2026 and then a future year's funding as well. And those two costs add up to 28 million plus. But in the chart from the years 2020 to 2025, the previous years, there was $41 million assigned. So that means we're losing $12 million when we know construction costs typically increase higher than inflation or faster than inflation. So I'm just curious where the 30% of the funding went away.
All right, I will take that question, and I know that this is going to be a major part of the discussion next week, as we're already kind of looking at which projects are the most community interest, and this is near the top of the list, if not the top of the list. So we'll take this as a question, and Autumn, we can try to provide an answer in writing prior to next week as well. So thanks.
I appreciate it. Yeah, because there's a lot of development taking place in Newport Way with more in the works. So it's really, I know right now the traffic patterns are low because of the pandemic, but eventually things are going to get back to normal, and we're going to see a major, problem on Newport Way.
And I think, as I mentioned, and thanks for the question, I think as I mentioned, this is one of those projects that is enormously expensive. And so I think the strategy at this point, there is some federal money that's already been received. I know that there's right-of-way acquisition that is one portion of the large costs associated with this. I think we're going to have to look and see how both the state of Washington and the federal government fund large transportation projects. The state of Washington is grappling with a transportation package right now, which it's really hard to know what's going to happen with that. There is no money specifically for this project earmarked in that budget. But if it doesn't happen, and I think that smart people with about a week and a half or less than a week and a half left in the session, they may have to come back for a special session, or they may punt this to a future year. So I think the more we can invest on the front end now to make this project as real as possible, make those construction dollars as real as possible. My guess is, and I don't have the specific answer, but my guess is one of the answers for the changing construction costs is just going to be the more you scope, the more the project changes. As the project changes, estimated costs change. And the best thing we can do to help ourselves is to get those costs nailed down, get the scope of the project nailed down, because then we'll be able to go to our legislators in Olympia and also in Washington, D.C. The other piece that is new from 2 years ago is that the federal government is now talking very actively about transportation investments, or really all local infrastructure investments. And so that is brand new. I mean, we're hearing from both U.S. senators, we're hearing from Congresswoman Schreier, asking for projects. So the sooner we have good dollars for this, the Lake Sammamish mobility project and the under overcrossing, those are the three big projects that really need as tight a scope as we can get them, because if the Congress continues to allocate the funds, we need to be able to go to our Washington representatives and say, here are our specific needs. And those three projects, Newport Way, the under overcrossing, and the Lake Sammamish mobility issues, those will be the three big ticket items for us. And that's how we'll fund these Newport Way improvements. If we're not able to get money from Washington, D.C. and Olympia, even if we pass a transportation tax in Issaquah, as has been discussed previously, the dollars that would be generated still wouldn't cover all the money needed for this project. So Thanks for the question, and we'll get more specifics on that.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Very good presentation.
Other comments? I mean, there's only 5 of you, so go ahead and chime in, I guess.
Connie has her hand raised, and then I've got a question in chat we can ask after.
Okay, great. I'm seeing the chat, and I'm not seeing anything. Thank you, Autumn.
Yeah.
Why didn't you go ahead and ask the question in chat? Because I've got my usual shotgun grouping of comments.
So the question is, how does the expansion of light rail fit into these capital projects?
Well, that's the under overcrossing. You know, we need to have a place to put a station. And if we don't have a place to put the station, there'll be no light rail. And so we need as a community to be, in my opinion, I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for the mayor or the council, but I think we need to be forthright. Otherwise, there will not be any kind of rapid transit, light rail, bus rapid transit, anything to Issaquah if we don't take the lead and keep that project moving forward.
Okay, Dave? I think Dave's talking, but he's muted.
I should be heard now.
There you go.
Well, I guess one thing, as long as we're going to keep calling it Pickering Ditch, we're not going to solve the problem, because a narrow ditch isn't going to work. The beavers are going to win. We got to look at Pickering Creek and get it some length and some width and some overflow area into wetlands and the rest. And you know, there's some magic about calling it a ditch instead of a creek in terms of fish or something, but it ain't going to work as a ditch. Now, facilities concern I have, and is the great land the city has, maybe still has, over where the city shops are, the public works shops. We're talking about our parks facilities, our facilities maintenance, parks maintenance, and expansion of public works operations and people and equipment and all the rest. Why are we giving away prime property over there to do a project on Newport for a worthy project for low-income housing? But industrial land, which is what we have over there, is in short supply in the city, and to try and put industrial uses on other property, if it's even affordable, is going to be a real challenge. Those are my 2 pet peeves or whatever.
Sure, and thanks for those. I'll take the ditch creek issue back to our engineers. It's not one that I'm particularly familiar with. I can speak a little bit more to the public works property issues. You know, that has been a policy decision by the city council to continue to move forward with the project regarding the transit-oriented development opportunity center. That's not been finalized. That work continues. But I think as we look at our future needs, the shops, the public works operation yard is really the bottom of our list. I mean, that is probably among the nicest facilities we have. And while everything we have, we're here forever. And so you can't say anything is done, because since we are here forever, there's always going to be investments that are going to be needed. But the reality is that facility is at the bottom of our list. That pretty much every other piece of property we own has greater needs than that property. It will absolutely come up, and they aren't making any more land. And if their land is not there for some sort of potential future expansion, then it's not there. But from an operational and a funding perspective, we will not be investing any significant dollars in expansion of that facility. You know, certainly not in the 6-year period. I would say certainly not in the next 26-year period. Other questions or comments?
Well, I'm ready to go if you're ready for me. Okay, so I'm going to go backward a little bit down the hot topics of conversation. If because I read the CIP in total, right? And so that gives you a different perspective on the presentation that the city council was given and that the community was given just now. And in that 6-year TIP, in the projects, there is a request for new investments in the shop. And there's actually something saying that we need to expand our shop because we do not have space. So if what you are saying is true, then you need to get those projects out of your 6-year TIP because you are just contradicting what's in your CIP. So it's awkward. Now, the park shop being totally in the creek buffer is not a small thing. This is a salmon-bearing creek, and you've seen the statistics on our salmon going down. And so to say this is not an important thing for the next 20 years, I don't think fits in with the community values. So, so this brings me back to the presentation, which was presented with notable projects. So when I went back and I looked through the CIP, several of the projects that I think are notable were not in the notable projects. And so I don't know that this presentation is going to carry through for anything, but I think it might have been better served to say funding that we're looking at for 2022. So these are the projects that we are considering to have the most near-term funding, because some of the notable projects aren't looking at being funded in 2022 yet, because they're notable projects. They sound like they're being emphasized. When you look at the actual CIP, they don't appear to be being emphasized. So this brings me to the criteria for choosing the sort of priority order or the near-term funding of projects. And so you have a bunch of different categories. One is environment, one is community. And so when I looked through the chart, it was clear that different people scored their projects differently. And when I was listening to the same meeting last night, it was basically each of the departments scored their thing. So it would be good to figure out some sort of consistent method. Now, in the CIP itself, there was more information about what the definition of these criteria were. So for environmental impact, for example, in the CIP itself, it says, is the project addressing an environmental concern or would not be completing a project resulting in the detrimental environmental impact? So that's only one part of environment to me. To me, it's, if you build this project, are you going to be impacting the environment? And what would that do to the community values of environmental respect, right? And so I didn't think that that was a correct criteria or a holistic criteria for judgment. And then it was interesting because when you went through the projects where the little check marks were, it wasn't consistent at all. Things that I know will help the environment didn't necessarily check it. And other ones that I know will harm the environment or at least create impacts did check it. So that was confusing to me. And then there's the concept of community priority. And I sat through many of the mobility master plan meetings where the committee kept saying, well, you guys are presenting us with these lists, but we don't necessarily feel that these are the most important things. We think that, you know, getting more of the gaps in the neighborhoods might be more important, yet those things were never reflected in the priority order of the mobility master plan as they presented these projects. So I have a vision of the community being the people who are in the town, almost neighborhood by neighborhood, saying, what are the important things in our neighborhood? Where would we spend the money? And that would be maybe a more accurate rendition of what community priority is. And then I'm getting there, I tell you. Conformity to the strategic plan. So we seem to have this concept that we want to become less car oriented, yet the majority of the transportation projects are auto based. Almost all of the trails, walking things, or parks. Even the bike skills park is recreation. So this policy or concept that we want to become less auto based is not carried forward in your capital improvement plan in the transportation section. It's carried by the parks projects, but interestingly, the parks projects are not part of the mobility master plan. They are splintered off into the park strategic plan. And so I would like to see more of a judgment on, are we getting a bang for our buck to get to our goals? If our goals are to get people out of their cars so that we don't have the traffic turn on that Hart thinks we're going to have, then we need to be focusing our money on the things that make that so. And I don't believe that this capital improvement plan is heading us in that direction. And then last, and this is more specific, and I know you don't really want specific, but we have never had a community conversation about where we want to put a light rail station. And I just heard you say that we must do the 10th overcrossing that was in the central Issaquah plan, because we must begin to let Sound Transit know that that's where we want our light rail. That's an interpretation. You didn't say that exactly, so don't yell. But I'm a little blown away by the concept, because we've never had the discussion where we want it. We've never had the discussion where we want the end of the line cars to go, because we're the end of the line. So what are the impacts of this? And this is a community debate. This is no small issue, even if it's happening in the future. To say that we want to begin this central Issaquah plan concept of a third over or under crossing as a de facto place without that community discussion, I sort of stick my feet in the sand and yell, no, cart in front of the horse. You're leaving the people behind, and it's our town. So you have to ask us what we're thinking and what we want and how it should be. So, and that was never done in the Central Issaquah plan anyway. You guys just went forward with it. So back up, slow down, and ask us what we want our town to be. Now, on the upside, now that I've done lecturing, thank you for bringing it out to the public. Thank you for giving it to the boards and commissions. A total step in the right direction. And so, you know me, carrot stick, carrot stick, carrot stick all day long. And I apologize, but it's only because I want this city to be the best it can be. And I'm not going to let people just do what they want to do in their cubby holes without some challenges. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Let me just cover a couple of the points that you made. The last one first. I think the light rail piece, you know, the funding that is we're looking to get from the state of Washington is really to start those conversations, is to begin to take the next steps from the Central Issaquah plan, have community dialogue. Those processes take time and money, and so we're looking to fund those to begin that process. And community dialogue is, you know, chief among the things that we hope to accomplish there. Going back to the top, you talked about the public works shop. You know,
I want a community dialogue for a second on that topic. So then the project is not presented correctly, right? If that is your intent, then you need to say that that is the intent. Right now, you're getting funding to do an overcrossing at a particular street or undercrossing of I-90, right? It doesn't say anything about a community conversation for potential placement of light rail. Okay, sorry. I just, you know,
and I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. And if we going to agree to disagree with that, let's get the money and let's try it, and we'll see. because I'm sure we'll both be at those discussions. So we'll move forward with that. And I see one more finger.
Wait. So I have to clarify. So you are telling me that phrasing it like this is a mechanism to get the money, and the intent is to have the community conversation, but you have to phrase it like this to get the money?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the bottom line is we need to move forward with light rail. We need to have it end somewhere. The Central Issaquah plan identifies a general area. And so we're looking for funding to take the next steps to have a dialogue, to get engineers, to get designers, and see what happens. But if we do nothing, then nothing will happen.
The Central Issaquah plan only painted a very broad swath on either side of I-90 for placement of a rail station. It did not ever say that the rail station was in this over or under crossing. So,
and I think that will be part of the dialogue if we get funding to do it. And if the state of Washington doesn't provide that funding in a budget that they hope to adopt in the next 10 days, then the city council will have to look and see where this fits in its priorities for funding for 22 and beyond. But you raised several other issues, Connie, so I'd like to try to hit a couple of the rest of them. You talked about the public works shop, our public works operation facility. You also mentioned the small facility that we have behind Tibbetts Creek Manor. That we will continue to look at, and if we need to relocate that, that may or may not end up at the Public Works Operations Facility. So when I was discussing the needs of that specific Public Works Operations Facility, that was separate from other. We also have a facility maintenance facility in the downtown. Those are separate discussions, and they may or may not be part of a main Public Works Operations Facility. They may be elsewhere. So I just want to.
Right, and the one I was talking about was Confluence Park, where the park shop is in the buffer, and both of those are within the next 6 years in your CIP lists. Both of those projects. So
and they may or may not end up at our existing Public Works Operations Facility. So when I was making the broad pronouncement about our Public Works Operations Facility being at the bottom of our list, I still stand by that. But we do have other facility maintenance facilities that we are going to have to take a look at. The criteria for choosing projects, as I mentioned in the presentation, we need to continue to refine that. And then the issue of being less auto-based, I think that's a tremendous policy question for the council. And I think one of the challenges with any capital improvement program is how do you balance needs with revenues? How do you balance moving forward public policy questions in the balance of all that? I mean, the reality is there are a lot of cars here now. What do we do to address that issue? What do we do in the future to address it as it changes? So, all right, other questions, comments? Have a whole other hour.
Well, okay, I'll join in on one here. Over there, the pump station proposed for the Highlands. It's a good project, needed project. The water tank is necessary future as well. A lot of pipe going in the ground. That site is amazing site that is under public ownership, which included the upper part county, the lower part state, and the city, and they're mixed in too, has been largely destroyed in terms of habitat. It's full of garbage, needles, syringes, the whole bit. It's just, we are fortunately getting a good price on it, a fixer-upper price. But we've got a lot of work to do to make that site worthy of what it can be. It's got little creeks and wetlands. And these are not just springtime, wintertime wetlands. These are spring fed right out of the mountain side of the hill. We have these springs that are feeding these wetlands and small ponds and the little creeks. So it's got great habitat potential over there. There's the possibility of doing a heck of a lot of cleanup and some trail building and other good stuff by volunteers. And we're going to have some good cooperation between the Public Works Department and the Parks Department and address volunteers in terms of bio-waste and needles and some of those kinds of things. there's tons and tons of material they can pick up there with, you know, the big tweezer type things, and avoid the needles, which are well advertised by all the orange caps on the ground, and just a huge amount of material over there that volunteers could safely remove much of it. So we've got a chance of connecting trail system in the Issaquah Highlands, the western part, down to the valley floor. We can get people, appropriate people, into that site that'll be watching the pump station, the water tank, and we won't have those ongoing problems. If we just have those isolated features over there, and the place will always be a problem area. If we can encourage good appropriate use over there by having a nice trail system and fix up those wetlands and the little creeks and the ponds, not have garbage floating in the ponds, and the rest, we can have a great win-win for public works and parks. And a lot of it could be done at a very moderate price in terms of the restoration, but it's going to take a change in how we function, I think.
So I'm going to bring Dave's up a smidge, same topic, but up a smidge. In the Central Issaquah plan, we have a storm water, and I think we even have a water project that they're just big bundles of money. And they say the projects will be announced later. So I don't understand in the CIP process how that works. If we have this pot of money, how does one suggest a project like Dave's project? And then how does the city decide which projects are going to be in sort of these small works projects? And this has been sort of an awkward situation for a long time. When Kerry Ritland was here long ago, he did it in the dark in the back. He threw dice and decided which projects were best. But in the Central Issaquah plan list, it's sort of awkward to see these pools of money and you don't know where they're supposed to go. It would be nice to find some sort of process that sort of like the Parks Department has a process that you can feed into, and it goes through a series of criteria, and hopefully they'll put it out in a publicly viewable list. It would be nice to have the same thing with the public works engineering people, so that it's more public facing, and maybe we can all get together with the community behind it to do awesome things. Okay.
Thank you both. Let me just comment, you know, this document needs to be that document. And so if we need to continue to work on some of those smaller projects to include, we can do that. The Central Issaquah Plan, Stormwater Sewer, I'm not sure, are you referring to a future year project as far as the document is concerned, Connie? When you say large amounts of money, is that something that's listed as a future project?
You have, I think there's two, and I don't have the CIP up right now, but there's two lists that are just blobs, and I think it's a stormwater one that says, and these projects will be decided in the future with council, community, and blah, blah, blah input. And I'm sort of going, well, okay,
if you could do me the favor, if you could do me the favor at some point, send me the page number, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. And I think there's two that, I know the other one is the transportation. John has a small works project in his transportation CIP with that same basic language, small works. We try to connect sidewalks and communities, and it's like, how do you decide? We don't know. Okay, I'll send you both.
Great. And then Dave's issue regarding the Highlands Pump Station. I know we have some money for cleanup. I appreciate you raising that. I'll ask our staff when we talk about utility projects to speak specifically to the issues you raised, Dave, because I think that's really important. And if the council wishes to, you know, make any changes or, you know, identify additional dollars or, you know, begin the discussion of additional dollars or volunteer opportunities, we can do that. So thank you for raising that, and we'll have that. That'll be on the second night of the discussions on May 3rd. So we'll shoot to have that highlighted on May 3rd. Other questions or comments?
If it's okay, I'd like to make a comment.
Of course.
Oh, okay. And since we're having kind of a conversation, I wanted to go back to Connie's comment about does the CIP, put us forward in terms of transit, and the same thought had kind of crossed my mind when I went through the CIP, and I was thinking, well, where's the transit aspect of this? And then I thought, well, maybe this doesn't fit with the CIP, but since Christy's here, and I'm glad we're kind of a small group, but Christy has been working on the local transit project up in the Highlands, and I'm just wondering, is there a capital project, or is there something that could help us move toward a more transit oriented in the CIP? Does anything come to mind, Christy, or is the CIP just not the right place to address transit?
I mean, I think one of the challenges is that there are largely operational issues. I mean, if we were going to say we're going to get into the bus business and then we're going to need, 25 buses, those buses would be the rolling stock, and then there'd be capital associated with that. But that's not what you mean, I don't think. I think
No.
that you're talking about the programmatic pieces of all of this. And so I think one of our challenges is how do we marry the program with the capital? And again, going back to why this is a plan and not a budget, it's really, I think at that point, when you look at the operating budget in the fall, that you can kind of put them side by side and make sure that we're doing the programmatic pieces that we need to do. In some cases, there's a large capital improvement that connects them, and so the issues of light rail and any infrastructure that might have to be built to accommodate light rail. I mean, that's that intersection of the programmatic and the and the capital. But in the near term, when we look at operational issues, those are largely programmatic. But I think the council has opportunities through the year to talk about that. We're going to have another mobility discussion where we're going to give an update, because the council had one, I think in February, and talked about the Talus Squaw Mountain shuttle, and the staff shared from a programmatic perspective. There was, the resources weren't there. The council said, figure it out. And so, we're going to do an update there. And so that then will feed into the operational budget potentially for 22.
I think it's kind of an intriguing question. So, Connie, thank you, and I'll be thinking about it. Appreciate the input. So, thank you.
Hey, can I make a comment there, City Administrator?
Of course, sir.
So one of the first things Wally said when we started today was the CIP is a planning document and not a budget document. I think where a lot of the stuff gets real, and Connie, to your point about the strategic projects that are identified there, those are really placeholder numbers. And then what we do is when we're working on the 2022 operating budget, that's when we'd actually allocate the funds to make that happen. And I think, Barb, you're getting to the same point. What we're really talking about is the plan. What, from my perspective, is important because it helps us with our long-term financing, and how are we going to fund this, and what's going to happen to our various fund balances over time. But where the rubber really hits the road and the work really gets done is when we start putting together our annual budgets, and maybe someday they'll be biennial budgets, but that's where we make the true allocations, and that's where we really say this is what we're going to do. At least that's my impression, Wally. And if I'm off base, I can be corrected with only minimal ego bruise.
No,
I'll jump in and correct you with minimal ego bruise. So as far as I'm concerned, that's true, except if you don't even know the projects that would fit better because they aren't highlighted in the TIP, you will not choose those projects in your budget. If you don't see them in the first 5 years, I have never seen a council member choose a project from 13 years out and suddenly say, wow, we want to do it next year. The only possible exception is the Providence Point intersection that had been on the CIP for 25 years waiting to happen. So I think that you have to set the stage with this document, and then you finesse it in your budget.
Yeah, we said the same thing.
Oh, that was the same thing? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Perfect. I agree then. Totally agree with you, Chris.
Other questions or comments? Going once.
Well, can I just, I'm just going to throw this in and thank everybody for showing up because this was a great conversation. And Wally, thank you for taking time away from the cul-de-sac and leading us through this presentation this evening. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll plus one that as well. Thanks to everybody who showed up and spent time with us. It was very, very helpful. Thanks.
So let me just review in Autumn, make sure that I've got this correct. We talked about the construction costs for the SR 900 Newport Way project. So we'll get that information and we can share that as an email. And I think also make sure that when we chat about it with the council that we can highlight that. The issue of the Pickering Ditch versus Pickering Creek, we want to make sure that we address that in the council's discussion on those infrastructure issues. The community priority pieces, I think we've talked about. I think move forward next year with that. I think we'll do a summary of comments though, Autumn, and we'll make those available to the council between you and I. We can do that. The issue of light rail was more a discussion point, and certainly the council will talk about that a lot when we talk about the project, because I think there's, what's happened with the pandemic, with mass transit in general, is very concerning. I mean, the King County Transit bus issues really shifting a lot of the bus resources away from Issaquah to South King County. That's a very near-term concern. Clearly concerned that money will not be available in the out year for light rail of any sort coming to Issaquah potentially. So I think that's going to be whatever investments we make in the near term to help make some of those projects reality, I think are going to continue to be a discussion point for the council. The pump station for the Highlands will come back on May 3rd and talk a little bit about the current conditions and what money are going to be invested to clean that up and to make sure that it remains a good opportunity to connect trails and the use of volunteers there. And then Connie's going to get me the pages on the central Issaquah plan, the stormwater sewer buckets that were there.
No,
Those were my notes.
Okay, that was capital improvement plan and they're already set. And I have one last thing. In the capital improvement plan discussion for this year, is there ever going to be a conversation about what the future looks like for projects like broadband and things for the changing world? Because this feels much like a pre-COVID capital improvement plan. And so it does seem like there needs to be a place to look up from and try to guess what the future is and try to figure out how to arrange money differently if some of those projects need to be put on the plate. I'm not saying near term. I'm just saying, well, maybe near term, maybe. So I think that's a super important thing to add to the conversation.
So next week is a double feature at the Issaquah City Council. We've talked about night 2, but night 1 is the Federal Relief Act money, the $8.6 million. And I think you'll hear from Mayor Pauley. I'm going to steal just a little bit of her thunder, the very point that you raised. And so she's going to challenge the council to think broader with the investment of those dollars. Certainly infrastructure, broadband infrastructure is called out specifically in that. And I know that as she's been talking with other mayors around the country, she's been very inspired by a lot of the big thinking that she's hearing from her colleagues and wants to share those thoughts with the Issaquah Council so that it considers next steps for this funding. We're not going to, the federal government's not even going to issue rules on this until sometime next month. So there's still plenty of time to do that. But that's Monday evening's discussion with the Tuesday being the CIP. So
Cool.
tune in. I don't know that you watch council meetings that regularly, Connie, but just in case,
Nah,
I would encourage you to think about Monday and Tuesday evening.
once a
Please.
year. That's
Yeah.
it. You know that.
I have to finish that presentation before I go home tonight. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do before I go home tonight. Yeah.
Mary's
Yes,
looking
Mary.
like she has a question.
But just to add to that, because I think the city wants to do more about equity, broadband is one, housing is another, and not necessarily what is in the transit development, but also how can we spend some dollars maybe to team with other entities so we can have more shelters for homeless and transients here in the city and help them out. And I don't see that. Maybe it's in the budget, but I don't see anything in that way, especially if it's going to be talked about on Monday. Just like you were saying for the transit to get light rail, we need to have those things place marked in the CIP and in our long range planning if we want that to happen and to get funding. So that ought to be part of it too.
And I think the opportunity that, we're not alone. Every community in America has been given a big bucket of money by the federal government, and then there are going to be a fair amount of strings attached to it. But I think, opportunities for partnerships, everybody's getting it. I think, Sammamish is getting twice as much as we are. Renton, Bellevue, everyone's getting millions and millions of dollars. So there's going to be a lot of regional opportunities. I think it's just going to be a matter of how to leverage it within the rules and regulations that the money is going to be made available for. But again, in my discussions with Mayor Pauley, and I'm stealing a little of her thunder again, so please don't tell her. I'll keep this a secret amongst us. She is going to challenge the council next week to think about these kind of issues as we are certainly on the ground floor of larger discussions.
Right. But my bet they've got the other cities have the more money because they're further down the pike with thinking about it than we are.
No, not at all. I mean, the money's allocated on a per capita basis. So larger cities get more money. All right. Going once, going twice. Thank you all for coming tonight, and we'll see you at future meetings. Take care.